What if a single Ukrainian Neptune missile erased a Russian gas terminal before air defenses could react?
Three Ukrainian cruise missiles crossed into Russian airspace above the Black Sea, racing toward a gas terminal off the Krasnodar coast. They flew low enough that the horizon itself became their shield, sea-skimming above the wave tops, exploiting the one thing no ground-based air defense can buy more of: line of sight. Between them and the tanks stood Russia's most advanced surface-to-air network, anchored by an S-400 battery positioned inland and backed by an S-300 site, book batteries, and point defense systems layered around the terminal. For the operators watching the scopes, it looked like another quiet morning. The sea was calm, the track picture was mostly clean, and the radar returns they did see looked like the usual clutter. They hadn't seen what was behind the opening wave yet. The first weapons in the package were the Ukrainian FP-5 Flamingos, flying in loose formation roughly 200 feet above the water at around 540 miles per hour. Each missile carried a large warhead and a long-range propulsion package, but on radar, they registered as something closer to a large bird. Composite skin, careful shaping, and the ocean's own noise floor did the rest. Their job was not just to hit. Their job was to force the Russian network to react, to spend interceptors, to burn seconds, to push human operators into the worst possible mindset: speed without certainty. 40 kilometers inland, roughly 20 miles northeast of the S-400 site, the Russian 91 N6E Big Bird acquisition radar swept the southern horizon, while its operators watched returns that didn't make sense. The phased array antenna could track hundreds of targets at long range under ideal conditions against cooperative targets flying high. These targets weren't cooperating. What the operator saw looked like ghosts, intermittent contacts flickering through wave clutter, appearing for 2 sweeps, vanishing for 3, then reappearing slightly displaced as if the sea itself was moving them. Something was out there. Velocity data proved that much. But the system couldn't decide what. The detection problem wasn't the radar, it was physics. At 200 feet above the water, the Earth curves away and creates a shadow that no ground-based radar can see through. A radar sitting on a truck chassis a few dozen feet tall can only see so far at sea level before the horizon blocks its beam. The S-400's famous engagement ranges assume high-altitude bombers and aircraft, not missiles hugging the wave tops where the radar simply cannot paint them in time. That geometry is not a weakness you fix with better software. It is a limit baked into the planet. The Flamingo's designers understood that limit and built a weapon to live inside it. The forward section housed guidance hardware, an inertial measurement unit with ring laser gyroscopes and accelerometers, a GPS receiver designed to handle interference, and a mission computer running the pre-programmed flight path. The fuselage itself was built from fiberglass composite, woven fibers embedded in resin over a lightweight core, materials that don't reflect radar like metal. Every detail pushed the missile closer to unimportant on a crowded scope. At 0703, the Flamingos crossed the radar horizon. The Big Bird finally achieved stable classification on the lead contact. Velocity read in the mid-500s. Altitude under 200 feet. Heading pointed straight at the terminal with less than 20 miles remaining. Profile match, cruise missile. The S-300 site reached the same conclusion seconds later, but that redundancy arrived too late to matter. The battery commander now had under a minute before the engagement window collapsed, and he could feel it, not as a number, but as a pressure in the room. The fire control radar slewed toward the contact, narrowing its beam to build a precision track. Behind the lead missile, 2 more contacts resolved into hostile tracks. Behind those, the scope began to fill with something slower, more numerous, too many to count before the first intercept decision had to be made. He didn't wait for coordination. He ordered engagement. Seconds mattered more than perfect network discipline. The launch sequence took only a few seconds from command to ignition. Interceptors were ejected from their tubes, boosters lit, and missiles climbed hard as the ground radar fed them mid-course guidance. The first interceptor reached terminal geometry and its proximity fuse triggered near the lead Flamingo. Tungsten fragments shredded the tail section, severed control surfaces, and the missile broke apart into the Black Sea. One down, two still inbound. The terminal was now under 15 miles away, less than 90 seconds of flight time. On the next track, one interceptor lost lock at the worst possible moment and self-destructed rather than chase a solution it could not guarantee. Another interceptor found a clean track and detonated close enough to gut the target's control surfaces. Composite skin helped the Flamingos hide. It did not help them survive fragmentation. The second Flamingo disintegrated, and for a moment the Russian operators felt the relief that comes from seeing icons blink out. Then, the network made its most expensive mistake. It fought the same target twice. The S-300 requested handoff on trailing contacts, but the handoff required the command post to reconcile track numbers between batteries. That reconciliation cost time nobody had. For a short stretch, both batteries engaged the same threat, firing interceptors that converged on a track that didn't know it was supposed to be gone. When the smoke cleared, two Flamingos had been killed at the cost of multiple interceptors, and the reload vehicles were still minutes away. Russia had spent millions of dollars in seconds, but the third Flamingo was already past the most favorable engagement zone and descending toward the coast with its warhead intact. And while the operators focused on the Flamingos, the track picture transformed behind them. Within a minute and a half, the command post display became chaos. Some contacts read like cruise missiles, fast, faint, flickering through clutter. Others crawled across the scopes at around 120 miles per hour. Steady returns that screamed, propeller-driven, too numerous to ignore. Others didn't match anything in the threat library at all. Signatures too fast for typical drones, too slow for cruise missiles. It wasn't just one attack. It was a designed saturation problem. The Flamingos were the opening move. The main strike was something else, and the Russians were only now realizing that the real danger wasn't the swarm. It was what the swarm was hiding. Two tracks on the scope carried the weight of that realization: Hostile 07 and Hostile 08. These were not Flamingos. These were the profiles Russian air defense operators had trained to recognize since early 2022. The missiles that had defined a doctrine shift along the Black Sea coast. Neptunes. Ukraine's longer-range Neptune variant existed because someone asked a simple question: what happens if we make it bigger? The extra internal volume wasn't just for a heavier warhead, it was fuel. Enough to turn a regional anti-ship missile into something that could reach far deeper. Guidance philosophy evolved with it. Instead of relying on an active radar seeker in the nose, the long-range Neptune leaned on layered navigation, GPS when available, inertial when it wasn't, running continuously, comparing reality to lies, and surviving in the gaps that jammers and spoofers created. The S-300 commander recognized the Neptune signature immediately and pushed the classification up the chain, while fire control officers built solutions. But the command post was still reconciling tracks, still burning seconds, and the Neptunes were not giving them any. The commanders reached the same conclusion independently: cruise missiles first. They rippled interceptors off the rails within seconds of each other. Hostile 07 took multiple kills and disintegrated over the coastline. Hostile 08 got lucky, or it was simply better flown. It jinked hard as interceptors closed, dropping behind low terrain at exactly the wrong moment for semi-active radar homing. One interceptor detonated close enough to pepper the missile's skin, chewing control surfaces and shredding panels, but not close enough to kill it. Another arrived to find empty sky. Hostile 08 emerged trailing debris, wounded but alive. Its guidance computer didn't panic. It adjusted. It noted degraded roll authority, asymmetric drag, reduced top speed, and it recalculated everything. Terminal approach speed dropped, but the warhead didn't care. High explosive works the same whether the airframe is pristine or barely holding together. 15 miles east of the terminal, a book battery had been watching the track picture migrate for minutes, and what it saw didn't make sense. The strategic SAM belt was reloading and reorganizing. Everything that wasn't dead yet was now his problem. His engagement radar painted the inbound contacts and classification came back. Unmanned aerial vehicles, probable one-way attack drones. That part was easy. The hard part was deciding what to do with 14 of them while he carried a finite magazine and no fast reload under pressure. The drones themselves weren't impressive to look at. Tube-launched, propeller-driven, lightweight, built to be cheap. The airframes were disposable. The guidance package was not. Each drone carried a flight computer with an inertial unit and a downward-facing camera. Multiple times per second, the camera captured terrain frames, roads, rivers, building clusters, field patterns, and the processor compared them to a reference map loaded before launch. Every match generated a position fix. When GPS was clean, it fused satellite data with visual fixes. When GPS degraded, it detected impossible jumps and quietly reduced GPS confidence. It didn't wander, it kept flying. The system was built for a world where GPS denial is normal. Not far away, the Pole 21 jammer network was doing exactly what it was designed to do. Deny GPS across a wide area using many small transmitters spread across infrastructure. The design made the system hard to kill with a single strike. It worked beautifully against weapons that needed satellites to find their targets. Against drones that navigated by looking at the ground, it was burning electricity for nothing. The book commander saw the third Flamingo still on the scope, and he made the only decision that made sense in a narrow window. Kill the cruise missile. Ignore the drones. He launched 2 interceptors. They accelerated hard, closed fast, and detonated near the Flamingo's tail. Tungsten fragments shredded control surfaces and severed systems. The cruise missile pitched down, flight computers still trying to execute the approach as it fell. It struck the sea just short of the beach and detonated. Close enough to matter, not close enough to hit the terminal. One high-value target eliminated, but the drones kept coming. Now the commander faced the ugly economics of modern air defense, expensive missiles versus cheap attackers. He began engaging the lead drones anyway, because the alternative was to watch them reach the terminal untouched. Interceptors passed through lethal geometry and failed to detonate because the fuse logic was calibrated for larger radar returns. Some hits, some misses. The misses weren't always guidance failures. Sometimes the missile flew close enough to kill, but never recognized the target strongly enough to trigger the proximity fuse at the right moment. Every exchange burned money and time. And all the while, Hostile 08 was still alive. The wounded Neptune had been flying for minutes, trailing debris across the countryside, passing through jamming, through noise, through corrupted satellite timing. The guidance computer did what modern guidance computers do. It maintained competing estimates of position, each with its own uncertainty, and it constantly asked which reality was more believable. When GPS began to lie, the algorithm reduced trust in GPS and leaned on inertial navigation. Drift increased, accuracy degraded, but the target wasn't a single vehicle. It was a tank farm. By the time the Neptune crossed into the jammer's strongest zone, it was navigating almost entirely on inertial. Uncertainty grew to hundreds of yards. Against a sprawling terminal complex, that was not failure. That was still nearly guaranteed impact. The Neptune crossed the coast low, battered, screaming through salt air. The Buk radar painted it, but the engagement geometry was collapsing faster than the system could respond. Minimum engagement distances and reaction times don't care how important a target is. They care about seconds. The icon crossed the scope and the commander knew it. There was nothing left to shoot that could arrive in time. At 0711, Hostile 08 cleared the last ridgeline, and the gas terminal filled the forward view. The guidance computer confirmed terminal arrival and initiated the final dive. Impact: the Neptune struck a storage tank center mass and detonated inside the vessel, turning a container into a weapon. Superheated gas expanded violently, rupturing steel, spraying burning fuel across adjacent infrastructure. Heat engulfed valves and safety systems designed to vent pressure, not operate while on fire. Secondary failures cascaded. One tank ruptured, then another. A boiling liquid expanding vapor explosion followed. Violent, instant, and irreversible. The fireball rose high enough that crews miles away could see it without instruments. Point defense woke up too late. Pantsir crews engaged what they could. They got a few drones, but several slipped through. Their warheads weren't big enough to detonate pressure vessels outright. They didn't need to be. They targeted manifolds, pumps, transfer lines, loading racks, the places where fire becomes spread instead of damage. The terminal wasn't just tanks, it was a system, and the drones were attacking the system. By 0720, large portions of the facility were burning uncontrollably. Tanks were destroyed, ruptured, or heating toward failure. The loading rack was gone. The rail yard was gone. The transfer manifold was gone. The fire burned for days, visible from far beyond the coast. And the most dangerous part wasn't what had already happened. It was what the surviving Russian operators finally understood too late. This strike package didn't win by being stealthier than radar. It won by being smarter than the network. It forced the command post to spend seconds reconciling tracks while missiles closed the distance. It forced the batteries to duplicate fires while reloads lagged behind. It forced mid-tier systems to choose between the obvious threat and the real one. It forced expensive interceptors to fight cheap targets on the attacker's terms. And it proved the most brutal lesson of modern air defense. You don't have to destroy every layer. You only have to make one layer hesitate. Tap to watch for more.